Hey everyone, welcome to week 45. This is Monday. This is the first day of our Look Elsewhere week. So we're going to try to shift our gaze and put it in places that we don't usually understand as paint worthy. And we're going to talk about the worthiness of something being painted today, which is actually very important. But what we're trying to do is find a place that we usually don't understand as a source of painting and force ourselves to put our attention on that place. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, let's get started. This is Monday. This is the beginning of a new week, which means new theme. And the theme for this week, we're going to call it Look Elsewhere. Now, what we're going to try to do for this week is to set our gaze in a place that is uncommon for us. We wouldn't usually see these moments in our lives as a potential subject matter for our paintings. And what we're going to try to do during this week is say, okay, I recognize these motifs as repeating patterns that I use in my painting. Let's see what happens if I look elsewhere. And we're doing this for many reasons. For starters, we're doing it to challenge ourselves. There was a past week during this year where we tackled this one subject matter that was this electrical post that we had outside our apartment because I always thought of it as being beastly, as being this thing that I could never ever tackle because it was bigger than me. And it was really cool when I told myself, okay, give yourself a week, give yourself 5 different chances to tackle this specific subject matter and try and see at the end of the week if it really was something that you couldn't overcome. And if it was hard to overcome, try to evaluate why. Try to understand the reasons why this was something that was difficult for you to try and depict through painting. And it was tough for me, but I had a blast. And as soon as I started dissecting this weird object that I didn't really know how to digest through painting, as soon as I started breaking it apart and looking at it, at different times of the day, looking at details, looking at the whole, I actually gave myself a chance to say, no, I can actually paint this. This wasn't so scary after all. And I think the moral of that story, what we ended up learning from that painting exercise was precisely that, to say, wow, this wasn't that scary after all. And the point of this week is not to really confront our fears and say, I was able to paint this, but to recognize the things that we usually work with, those subject matters that repeat in our paintings, and to say, I'm going to put my energy, I'm going to redirect my energy elsewhere, and I'm going to try to place my attention on something that I wouldn't usually paint, that I wouldn't usually deem paintable, or worse, that I wouldn't usually thought of as being worthy of painting. And this is what we're going to try to combat during this week. This idea of things being worthy of painting. I believe that everything in nature, every bit of nature, which means every single moment in the universe, is worthy of painting, but not because when we make it a painting, we are going to be exalting it, we are going to be elevating it from its more grounded nature, from its earthly nature. No, making a painting of something doesn't suppose a higher state. I really want to emphasize this. Many times I encounter this when I, for example, paint somebody. Many times people are super kind and they're incredibly grateful, and they say things like, I'm so honored that I've been painted by you. And while I'm very appreciative of their generosity with their words, I always think to myself, no, it's actually the other way around. It's actually me who is very grateful that I had the opportunity to learn about that person and to also learn about myself and to also learn about painting while I was painting them. That really is the truth. But I really do believe that there's nothing magnifying about the act of painting. I think that if something becomes a painting, it's just a painting. A painting is a painting is a painting. It's not more or less than anything else. It's just this object in and of itself. Now, the messaging that can come from socializing a painting, the reflection that can come from, the observation of a painting, those are all wonderful things. But I just want to make it clear, at least for myself, and I can only speak for myself, I don't see painting as a glorifying act. I really don't. And I think that many times, painting is in this high horse, and we should take it down a notch, because while I do find that there's immense value in the act of painting, I think that we exaggerate when we put painting up in a pedestal and we start applauding it and eulogizing it. And don't get me wrong, this is coming from a person that adores painting and that is very conscious on the impact that painting has had on humanity's culture. So I can totally understand how powerful it can be, but I also want to be careful to not believe that when something is painted, it is somehow being transformed into this higher version of what it actually is. So I want to make that clear, and that's very important for me, because this week is not about saying, I found this incredibly boring, unassuming moment in my everyday life, and through painting, I was able to make it visible, and I was able to inject it with a life that it didn't have. Yeah, I think that maybe that's a little too grandiose for me. Honestly, I don't think that would be the important part of the equation. I think, and this would be my proposition to you guys, I think what's best about doing this exercise is to just say, I usually find in these spots moments in nature that consistently move me, and I've recognized how to translate those into painting, and I think I can do that efficiently. And so the end result is going to be this very attractive painting. That's what we usually do when we land with a very specific subject matter and when people start recognizing us by our subject matter. So the idea behind this is to say, well, perhaps you're bigger than your subject matter. Perhaps the essence of you as a painter, and by the way, I'm saying you, but I'm including myself. I'm actually speaking about us. So as I was saying, perhaps there is a broader painter, perhaps there is a bigger idea of a painter behind the subject matter. So we're kind of challenging a little bit this idea of you are what you paint. And this is a tough one. This actually is a tough conversation because I don't think it's a binary conversation. I don't think you can actually say, well, it doesn't matter what you paint, because it clearly does. Our subject matter is, in the end, what we choose to paint. It becomes what we choose to say. Those are the words that we visually want to communicate. So our subject matter does hold that message. It is obviously relevant when we're trying to communicate something. But we can also kind of take a few steps back and say, I do acknowledge that, but perhaps it doesn't quite matter. Perhaps I manifest myself regardless of what I paint. And I think that this is important. And let me see if I can prove my point. I've always believed that if you are a painter, you can be a painter anywhere. And let's try to understand it this way. You can find reasons for painting anywhere. Anywhere. You could be in this paradise, in this absolutely beautiful slice of nature, and you could convince yourself that that is what you need to paint. You are this explorer that has to find these divine moments in nature, and that's what you want to portray. You want to portray nature at its grandest. And you almost become like this National Geographic photographer where you depend on finding the most beautiful examples of nature in this planet, and that's what you want to paint. You can convince yourself that you are beholden to those glorious moments of nature. Or you could believe that you don't really need anything, like you're not beholden to anything. I mean, we are part of nature, and that makes us part of this boundless, this limitless availability of options. So if we want to paint something, we could pick literally anything in this universe, and that's going to be enough. That tiny little moment of nature is going to speak about a broader universe. So we can train ourselves into believing that we have to be out there and we have to search for these amazing views and vistas and these gorgeous landscapes. And only then we are going to be able to speak about the monumental nature of the universe. Or we can actually say, oh, just put me inside the most boring room that you could ever conceive, and I will find a lifetime of painting in there. And if you choose that very boring room, it doesn't mean that you have this ability to find worth in worthlessness. It really isn't about that. It's actually understanding that there is value everywhere. But again, the sense of value doesn't mean that value can only be exemplified when you evidence that potential through a painting. No, absolutely not. Value means that I can actually perpetuate this exercise of painting, this daily routine, and I can find moments in that initially understood as very bland and very boring nature, and I can seize it through painting. And I can say, no, there's actually plenty here for me to have this reflective experience through the act of painting, this exchange that can provide me with growth. That is the whole point. The whole point is not to produce this beautiful image in the end, to then prove everyone wrong. Oh, people said this was boring, and I am going to prove them wrong by making this beautiful diamond out of coal. We don't have to make diamonds. The act of painting doesn't have to produce diamonds for it to be valuable. And that's what I really want to hammer through in this conversation, because that's not where the importance of painting lies in. So that was a nice introduction. So let's get to the painting. I ended up painting this cord of the intercom that we have in the apartment. And I've always seen this cord, and as an object, I always thought it was fascinating. But as a subject of painting, I always told myself, oh no, I don't want to do that. And the reason I don't want to do that was because just repeating patterns to me are something that I try to avoid. And I try to avoid it because I always thought of myself as a very organic painter. You know, I'm not kind of like a Charles Sheeler type industrial painter. I don't like to measure. I try to avoid measuring, and I try to not check my drawing at all. I trust the way in which I navigate my images. Like, that's what I've convinced myself, throughout the years. I don't like to use a black mirror or a mirror for that matter. I don't like, and I try to avoid all these tools that we have at our disposal that are basically there to show us if we are off. How off is your drawing? And I don't like that. I really don't like that. And I'm even going to come clean. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want this idea of wrong infecting my painting practice. I know that I'll figure it out. I know that there are other ways for me to try and gauge if I'm doing something that doesn't quite feel right. But I don't like this idea of millimetrically measuring everything and trying to check everything with the hopes of then placing my drawing or my painting like on the right track. I don't like this idea of right and wrong while I'm painting. I actually appreciated that while I was studying, because everything was so complicated that all I wanted to hear was somebody tell me, yes, you're in the right track, keep going, or no, you're not. These are the things that you can do to actually make your life a little bit easier. I wanted to hear those things when I started to paint. But nowadays, I don't. Like, I've come to appreciate so many works of art that are quote unquote wrong that I realize, yeah, that doesn't matter. This idea of always being right doesn't really matter. Like, that's not where good paintings or good drawings are built from. Again, I avoid that, and I make an effort so that those devices don't really infect my way of thinking, or I don't want to bring them into my painting practice because they are really buzz killers, honestly. So that I really don't like. And to get back to the painting, when I would see this cord, it was so full of repeating patterns that I always look at repeating patterns as my opportunity to mess up. I'm like, oh no, they're not going to look the same. They're going to feel different. And if they start to feel different, then I'm going to miss the whole nature of this thing feeling kind of like industrial. And again, I don't have the hand to do that. So I always try to avoid those subject matters. I always try to tell myself, no, that's going to be boring for me to draw, to paint. I'm never going to find a huge amount of pleasure in trying to depict that through painting. For today, I told myself, okay, what if you try and tackle this problem? But what if you make it interesting for yourself? And that's where I think painting can become this wonderful ally. Because I may feel that this object in itself is actually quite interesting. But when I have to view it through a painting lens, I'm always going to be like, no. So I told myself, well, what could you do to make it interesting for yourself? And my first thought was like, okay, I have to paint light. If I'm going to paint that, I'm going to give hierarchy to light. So I want to paint light falling onto that object instead of this object being lit by light. That to me was super clear. So I had to have a lighting condition that was interesting to paint. And the other thing was, I don't want to repeat the looping drawing of this chord at every single moment. And I don't want to check to see if they all match up or if they're all the same width, if they're breaking at the moment that it makes sense. I was like, no, I don't have the patience for that. I'm not that sort of painter. So last week was super important because it actually taught me that I could navigate this idea within a soul painting of abstraction and representation. So I was like, okay, I'm going to find moments in this chord that I'm going to try to be very careful and very sensitive with my drawing, and that I'm going to let myself go at other moments. If I can hold on to this pulsing nature of abstraction, representation, and I can just make it flow very nicely through this chord, then I'm all good. So that was two things, light and what I've described as this oscillating nature between abstraction and representation. And for the third thing, I was like, and I have to compose it nicely. If I'm going to do this, it can't just be this thing where I'm trying to paint a chord as if I was trying to do a naturalist painting of a chord or a realist painting of a chord. The fact that I paint a chord, a phone chord, is not what's important about this painting. I much rather speak about its chordness and not rely upon the responsibility of depicting a chord. So what I didn't want was this very immediate idea of saying, oh, that's the painting of the chord. I didn't want the subject matter to be so overpowering. So I thought of the utilitarian factor of the chord, and we don't have to be super specific, but it actually connects two different moments, and that connection enables us to communicate. So let's try to understand in those very abstract terms. And what I liked is that even though we can suppose, because we kind of understand the nature of this chord being part of a telephone, even though we suppose that that is what's happening in this upper area of a painting that is outside the picture plane, it is kind of cool to actually cut that information from the top and to let the cable be born from shadow, from this almost emptiness of shadow, this void. So we don't really understand the line of communication here. So it's almost like communicating with the unknown. And the fact that the object itself that would make it possible for us to be able to communicate is outside the picture plane, it also makes the idea of communicating impossible. So I was like, yes, that's actually pretty cool. That in itself kind of tells this vague story. And it's a very simple thing. It's just cutting the composition at a certain height, and that just gives it like a completely different nature. So I was like, okay, those three things seem wonderful. Composition, light, and the fact that I can understand my naturalist impulse as also moments of abstraction. And when I recognized that, I was like, yes, I can completely tackle this bit of subject matter that I have evaded forever. Why was I mentioning that I wanted to hammer this idea home? Because this coiling chord brought to my mind immediately Jim Dine's tools. And Jim Dine is one of the most talented draftspeople of the 20th century. He was an incredible draftsperson. And particularly, the drawings and prints of his tools are just mesmerizing. His drawings, they do have this utilitarian air to them, but they also feel like these weird contraptions. I mean, they are very familiar to us, obviously, but he's also able to communicate them, to portray them as these weird contraptions. They almost feel like torture apparatuses. There's a weird kind of disconnect there. But again, I think Jim Dine, specifically with those drawings, had this ability to communicate the industrial aspect of these tools. And that's something that I wanted to not do, or at least not do throughout the whole of the painting. And I think he has some of that too. So maybe in my mind, there are things that separate this effort from, his tools series. but maybe, there's a lot of stuff that they share in common. So that was kind of cool. I actually didn't think of Jim Dine while I was painting this. I actually thought about it, a couple of minutes before I started to do this VO. So it was pretty cool when I look into my visual memory bank and say, oh, wow, there's probably a lot of echoing between this little effort with some of Jim Dine's amazing drawings. So that's going to be it for today. Again, the essence of what we're trying to do during this week is to just place our gaze in a moment of our everyday lives where we didn't really consider that moment as something that could spur a painting act. And we're going to try to give those moments a chance. So that's going to be it for today. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Remember, tomorrow, Spanish Tuesdays, Martes de Español. I'm seeing a lot of you guys making great efforts into trying to understand some of my Spanish. For sure, my Spanish is not the most formal Spanish, especially when I do these VOs, because I actually let loose a little bit. I'm a bit more formal when I speak English. That may come as a surprise to the people that think that my VOs in English are horrible. But thank you for making that effort. So tomorrow, Spanish. I'll see you guys. Thank you for watching. Bye.